Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Talk about deja vu all over again. Or in this case, I told you so. For the second time in a week, the U.S. is claiming that a Navy vessel and some commercial ships that they were escorting came under attack by Houthi rebels in Yemen. If you don't know what that's about, you can watch the previous video I did about it, but the upshot is that there's a proxy war going on in Yemen. The Iranians are backing the Houthi rebels, and the Saudis, along with the U.S., are backing the current Yemeni government. Not hard to see who the white media wants you to see as the bad guys here. I clued onto this story last week because it was totally suspicious to me how the white media just randomly decided to do blanket coverage about the Houthis, a group that I only had passing knowledge of, and to throw them into the news cycle and to do it widespread so everybody would see it. It's like I've always told you, nothing happens in a vacuum under white supremacy. We know what's normal, quote-unquote, for them and what's not. And when they just came out of the blue with these guys and giving blanket coverage to them as if they were so important, that's how you know somebody wants these guys to be put in front of you. Somebody wants these Houthi rebels and the occasional pot-shot missile attack that they do to be front of mind for you. Keep in mind, this isn't the first time that the Houthis have done this. They've launched missiles before at U.S. warships. The last time they did it was back in 2016 in the dying days of the Obama administration. See, this has happened before, but the white media barely mentioned those prior missile attacks when they happened. Now, though, they're describing this as a major escalation. Major escalation? That's the kind of phrasing that they normally only use for China or Russia or North Korea. 2 missiles is what constitutes a major escalation? To say major escalation gives the impression that this has been going on all the time. This is some sort of years-long rivalry that's coming to a head, but it's not. And the Houthis are not some nuclear power. I could see it differently if this was China or Russia, but it's not. You got some ragtag rebels who want to put together their own little Islamic caliphate out there. This is not something that's the end of the world, but the white media is talking about it as if just the fate of the world hangs in the balance. Major escalation indeed. Funny, they didn't use that kind of alarmist rhetoric when they were talking about the prior Houthi missile launches several years back, but the AP is a U.S. government propaganda organ. As I explained last week, they had the Houthis in their sights for several years now. Why? Because they see making a big deal out of the Houthis as being their entree to the real goal. A war in Iran that they can use to bring down the current government and install puppet leaders who will do their bidding, just like they did in Iraq. Iran has been on the U.S.'s to-do list for decades, and with the war in Israel, a number of policymakers in the U.S. and Tel Aviv are testing the waters, literally, to see if maybe now will be their chance to finally cross Iran off that list of nations that the U.S. has been wanting to topple. These stories are not news stories, these are trial balloons. They're taking the public's temperature. Last week, they claimed that one U.S. warship in the Gulf of Aden, which is to the south of Yemen, had 2 missiles fired at it, though the missiles landed 10 miles away from the ship. But that was called an attack. Well, just remember the black media called this out, and we told you that last week's attack was hardly the end of this story. And yesterday there was a report that it happened again. Only this time they're claiming it was 2 ships that had missiles lobbed at them in the Red Sea. Not just one Navy ship, now they're saying it was 2 ships. And this time they're saying that the Houthis have taken credit for the attack, with the Houthi general saying that they hit one ship with one of their missiles and they used a drone against another. The general allegedly has said that the Houthis have warned ships about coming in that area, especially if those ships are Israeli or associated with the Israelis. Now, I'm curious about what was on those ships. Why would the Houthi want to be taking potshots at them? They didn't say that they would attack any ships in the area. They said that they would attack ships that they thought were Israeli or associated with the Israelis. So the Houthis apparently think that they have reason to target those ships. I'd like to know why. The white media calls them cargo vessels, that they're commercial vessels. Well, keep in mind, the big weapons manufacturers, the ones who make things like the Iron Dome system for Israel, when they load their missiles and their missile launchers onto those ships, that's considered to be commercial cargo. Well, if nobody knows what it is. And if these ships are heading to Israel, or if they're Israeli affiliated, why is it that there's U.S. warships guarding them? The Israelis have ships of their own. They should be doing that. They're the ones who want the weapons. Let them guard the ships. Hell, AP is saying that one of the ships that was involved is British, and that an Israeli citizen is one of the officers of that ship. That man, Dan David Unger, is the son of a billionaire Israeli shipping magnate, Abraham Rami Unger. So, right on cue, we see that there's the British connection. The Brits have been involved in every U.S. war for 100 years now. And we also see big money interest in Israel too, along with claims that the Houthis are going to continue taking pot shots at these ships passing through. This has all the makings of a disaster. Now, the U.S. can handle these guys with missile strikes of its own. The AP story mentions in 2016 that the Houthis got rowdy, and the U.S. hit some of the Houthis' radar sites with Tomahawk missiles, and that seemed to calm them down. But that was before Netanyahu's fat was in the fire. About the only salient things that I've seen in the Aryan propagandist, AP report, is that the ceasefire that was declared in Israel last week didn't hold, which I had told you it wouldn't. Netanyahu can't afford for this war to end soon, because the second it does, he'll have to face the music for having failed to prevent the October 7th attacks in the first place, not to mention his own ongoing corruption trial, which he was in the middle of before this attack took place. And with the war in Israel now resuming and global opinion sharply turning against Israel, they would benefit a lot from having another distraction, like, say, someone launching missiles at U.S. Navy ships. People in the U.S. are souring on sending Israel weapons and money, but if a U.S. warship is attacked, then the U.S. public might decide to go all in on continuing the war, or at the very least, the opposition to it might die down. It would even give certain interested parties an opportunity to expand the war in the region. The AP is even reporting that the Houthis have allegedly fired missiles toward Israel during its war in the Gaza Strip. This is basically making a direct connection between what the Houthis are doing and the war in Israel. So what that says to me is someone's hedging their bets, just in case the "we gotta go to war with them to stop Iran" angle doesn't pan out. They can always say, well, these guys are taking shots at Israel, so we gotta defend our ally. Whatever it takes. The fog of war covers a lot of things, but when the fog clears, all you have is wreckage. If something happens one time, it's a phenomenon. If it happens twice, it's a coincidence. But do we really need to wait until there's 3 times in a row before we recognize what's happening? Just because something hasn't happened in 60 years doesn't make it a phenomenon. That is, if you know your history. It's not clear whether or not the powers that be can parlay this into a full-on war with Iran, but this shows that someone would like it to go there. That's why they're making sure to have these news stories put in front of the public. They want the public to think about this, to see this. They want the steady drumbeat of news and threatening intimations about the Houthis to continue. It was also just yesterday that the rest of the world finally realized what I had told you from the jump. I immediately compared last week's missile attack report to the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Nobody else had made that connection, and they certainly didn't go into the withering detail about it that I did. So a week later, as usual, the white media pulls up the rear, or should I say the people who get their news online from white media outlets and websites. After the report of this latest missile attack, this time in the Red Sea, people are finally starting to show some skepticism. And yesterday on Twitter, you had Gulf of Tonkin trending. Long story short, people who had heard about this second alleged missile attack are now saying what we here have been saying for a week. This is exactly like the Gulf of Tonkin, and they're suspicious. They should be. Now, this is not about patting ourselves on the back here. You don't need it, and I don't care to aggrandize myself. This is about letting everyone else know that the information you get from the black media isn't just cutting edge, it's bleeding edge. As black people, too many of us have willfully gone along with the lie that the analyses you get from black people isn't that good. This is due to 2 factors. First of all, the Negroes you see on white media television or listen to on white radio or see in print on a white newspaper or publication, in 90% of cases, they're in the employ of the white media, and the white media doesn't choose its black mouthpieces based on intelligence. It chooses them based on their obedience. They don't talk about news because their job is to shuck and jive and to get you to do the same thing. So the joke reads and the breakfast schlubs are useless when it comes to enlightening the people. Second factor, the few Negroes who you hear from who are not necessarily in the white media's pockets, well, at least not all the way in there, though they aspire to be, a lot of them are usually on some Kundalini energy nonsense. Pure gibberish. So whenever they pretend to try to tackle issues, it usually devolves into asinine conspiracy theories. And let's be honest, 98% of those, they just regurgitate from whatever nonsense they see on white message boards or what have you. They don't even come up with their own conspiracy theories, they just recycle someone else's. See, the rich, the people who have monopolized the resources and who we have to fight against, they don't believe in getting their news from the TV or newspapers. After all, they own them. And they just use TV shows and newspapers to control, manipulate, and mislead you. The stuff that they call news is really just entertainment. Just another white media product, produced, packaged, and presented to you no differently than the latest episode of CSI. The men who truly run things, they get their news from people who they pay to gather it for them, and the stuff that they see looks nothing like the infotainment they put in front of you. This is what you need the black media for. Because while any old schlub can go beneath the headlines, we go further than that. We also make it a point to tell you what's coming next, and that's crucial. We want to set a high bar for what you should come to expect from anyone who claims to be bringing you the news. It's simply not enough to tell people what's going on. They can see that for themselves. What they need is for someone to explain what these things really mean and where the events are going. Tell them something they don't know. Because if the U.S. is reenacting the Gulf of Tonkin incident, black people need to know about that before the U.S. declares war on Iran. They need to know about it before the steady drumbeat becomes a deafening crescendo and people get swept up in yet another rush to war. If for no other reason so that black people can prepare themselves. I want you to rest assured that when you listen to the black media, you're not just getting the most accurate and intelligent information and commentary on this that's relevant to black people. What you're getting is the highest level of analysis, too. I said many years ago that I consider it my privilege and duty to feed the minds of my people. And when you sit down at Professor Truth's table, I don't serve junk food. This is why I stay away from celebrity gossip or discussing things about sports, entertainers, religion, etc., unless there's an important overarching reason that I can use the story to educate you on. Black people flock to those things because they don't require you to think. Those topics don't demand much from you. Petty amusements and vulgar distractions is what they are. To continue the food analogy, all that stuff makes your brain flabby and weak. You need to build up your mental muscles, and you can't do that with gossip and stories about stupid people arguing with other stupid people. I don't offer your mind junk food. I offer vegetables, fruits, and whole grains, the hard stuff. It's not comfort food. It's empowerment food. It's not necessarily fun to consume, but it will make your mind stronger because you'll develop an appetite for this and you'll lose interest in that other stuff. It's not sexy and it's not fun, but it will keep you alive and in the driver's seat. While everyone else is a week late and scrambling to get up to speed, you're already in the know. As I've told you, there's a reason I select to cover and comment on the stories that I do. When you look at my videos, you see that I cover a huge range of things. And at first blush, you may feel that it's somewhat random or that it may not necessarily be part of a whole, but it's only when you go back you look and see that things that I talked about weeks or months ago actually come to pass later on. I was telling you about the what and why of events that hadn't happened yet. And that being the case, obviously we're going to be keeping an eye on this latest major escalation, which is nothing more than a continuation of the U.S.'s 100-plus year-long never-ending war. You just make sure you keep both eyes and both ears on the black media. The old saying, forewarned is forearmed, is true. And that being the case, as black people, we need to make it our business to be armed to the teeth. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Burkett Cochrane, Stephen 12, Tiffany Johnson, Ronald Waits, and Jesse Garrett. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Now more than ever, black empowerment only exists because of you.